Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz drummer Jemal Ramirez. He spoke with us about his latest 2017 CD, African Skies, and it's charting very well. He also opened up about his dad being a musician in California while he was growing up, why he picked the drum set, seeing Freddie Hubbard when he was younger and how that affected him. It was profound. And he would go on to the Berklee College of Music, have a successful music career with teaching, recordings, and so much more. So please get to know Jemal and dig this interview, my friends.
So Jemal, man, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
No problem, Joe.
And speaking of skies, more tranquil skies would be called African Skies, and that seems to have treated you quite well. Talk to me about this album. It's charting well. It's a great album. Just talk to me about this album.
Oh man, well originally it was going to be two separate albums. It was two different dates for the session. It ended up being a double album based on the recommendation of Warren Wolf, who plays vibraphone and marimba on the recording. I'm glad we did it that way because I didn't feel like one album on its own really could stand by itself, you know. So they were almost recorded a whole year apart. Almost 1 year apart, short by a few weeks. But I'm really proud of the work the way it is. You know, the double album, like I said, didn't really intend for it to be that, but that's what ended up happening.
Your bio is one of the most elaborate jazz bios I've ever read. If there was ever any question about your life and your ascension to where you are as a human being today, somebody has not read into you and read your website.
Yeah, I guess I've gotten a handful of comments about the bio before. Yeah, that's true.
But it's great. It almost sounds like a very Steven Spielberg script. There's a real, you know what I'm saying? You're really getting to the essence of who you are, and I guess that's kind of what I like to do when I do these interviews. It's one thing to talk technicality, but it's more to kind of peel back the layers of someone's soul to understand why they do something as magical as jazz. And I guess that's my first question here. We go back to your bedroom at 4 or 5. You got a portable tape recorder, which, you know, I'm of the same generation of you, so this is just kicking up all kinds of great dust. And, you know, you got chewed up drumsticks. You're dreaming about your life. Talk to me about how the drum set is the instrument that you landed upon.
Well, honestly, man, it was really the only instrument in the house, you know, honestly. Some people might say that the home stereo that my dad had could be thought of as an instrument too, you know, maybe the way hip-hop DJs think of music making and whatnot. But in terms of like an instrument that you would see on a stage, and also growing up with MTV and watching these music videos where they actually had musicians playing instruments back then, you know, the early 80s, mid-80s, it just all kind of tied in together, you know. My dad was a drummer. He played music when he would come home from work. Watching him kind of be, you know, just an average person to kind of coming to life anytime he turned the stereo way up and would try to play the drum parts along to the songs he was listening to, made me view him, I guess, in a different light. And I just always got excited around, I guess, the way my dad responded to music. He was a very vivid person, the way he brought music to life visually for me, similar to the way I listened to music later on in college and even in high school to some degree with friends. You know, we would always turn each other on to new music, and one of my favorite things would be to, you know, turn somebody on to some music and just watch their facial expressions. It's, I think, something that's definitely missing in today's world where everything sort of happens behind closed doors. You know, everybody's on their devices and no one really listens to music in the same room very much anymore. And so I think had I only been exposed to music through my own accord on the internet, I don't think I would have chose to pick up music or play an instrument at all.
So your dad played in clubs. What kind of music was he playing?
By the time I really recognized what he was doing, he was playing mostly top 40 music. He would still play the occasional jazz gig, but you know, he grew up in the late 60s, early 70s himself, he was into like James Brown as much as he was into Forrest Silver or Billy Cobham or Weather Report. So, I mean, he listened to a lot of, and so did my mom. They listened to a lot of music on the radio, and we went to concerts growing up. I saw Hall & Oates in terms of like a pop concert. I saw them, and Huey Lewis and the News. So that was just as much a part of my upbringing and the Commodores as, the jazz stuff that my dad played on the stereo. Not too many jazz musicians, though, came through where I grew up or said. So my experience with jazz was always in the Bay Area, which is about 2 hours west of where I was born and raised.
What album, though, what jazz musician or album really parted some curtains for you and made you think, man, this is it. This is the stuff?
I think it probably was the John Patitucci, Yellow Jackets, a little bit of Weather Report, that stuff that was happening in the mid-'80s that was sort of newer at the time, the Chicory Electric Band stuff. Steve Smith had a band. A little later on, Jack DeJohnette and Terry Lynn Carrington came out with solo albums that were not really straight-ahead jazz, but they were always filed under jazz. Like the album I'm thinking of that had Terry Lynn Carrington, I can't remember the name of the album off the top of my head, but it has like Carlos Santana on a track, and then it'll have Wayne Shorter on another track, and back then it seemed to be the thing to do was to put sort of a different band together for each track, and every tune on the album might be recorded at a different studio in a different place in the world, and it wasn't so necessarily geared towards being just a one singular band sort of experience, but having a real idea of what the tune or song should be, and bringing in the right people together on those particular tracks. I mean, that's, I guess, the thing that really kind of brought me that whole idea that every tune can be sort of its own thing. It doesn't have to fit inside the mold of the band. Like with the way things were recorded back in the 40s, 50s, it was always band oriented. And, I think also the 80s were sort of like that. Madonna, she had used an entirely studio kind of band, and, she might have a completely different band go out on the road with her. And every pop artist, I think, in the 80s sort of operated that way. So I think jazz, to some degree, also operated that way. I mean, there's a pretty famous jazz fusion drummer named Dave Weckl. I think he's actually the main drummer on one of those Madonna albums early on. See those musicians sort of collaborate with people you wouldn't think they would collaborate with, and then they're playing changes, not completely, but enough that you might not recognize that it's somebody that you listen to all the time improvising. They're playing something way more basic for the pop records. That's actually what really kind of got me going early on. I really wanted to be a studio musician. I never felt like I loved one kind of music enough to just devote my entire work to just that one kind of music.
Well, the one thing about your bio is that it's very detail-oriented, but I think there's some key things that I want to kind of hone in on to get a better view of you as a musician. And one thing that stuck out early on was that Freddie Hubbard concert. Talk to me about that. How was that?
Yeah, it was great. It was my first experience in a jazz club. I can't remember if Kimball Deese is still there or not, but it's funny that you bring that concert up because the drummer who was on that gig, Eddie Marshall, who was a Bay Area legend for many years, would have been 80. Actually, he's 80 years old today, would have been 80 years old today, and they were celebrating his life in music at a jazz club in San Jose, which is where I live now, at this place called Cafe Stritch. His son, Alcide Marshall, was in a band that they put together especially to celebrate his dad and his music. They're actually playing somewhere else tonight and also somewhere on Saturday. Yeah, Eddie Marshall is awesome, man. Like, he's another one of those drummers. I was just reading up on him recently because I came home last night after that gig and pulled out the record that they played a couple of tunes off of that I had in my library, and I was reading the bio, and I had no idea he was in this influential band that kind of predates even the Miles Davis electric stuff that I didn't even know. It's called The Fourth Way.
Yeah.
I've never heard any of their music, but they recorded, I think, 4 albums from what I read. I haven't heard any of it. But, yeah, I saw him at that concert at Kimball's East, and he actually brought a trio to my hometown, Merced. I was talking to my wife about this last night. It's so weird because not too many jazz musicians are known as morning people, let alone drive, 2 hours to their first gig at 8 o'clock in the morning, 2 hours away. He brought a trio to Merced, the gig in front of like half of my school in the auditorium, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then came to our jazz band at a clinic. And I wouldn't meet him again until years later when I actually moved to the Bay Area in my early 20s. And I mentioned that stuff to him. The first time I saw him, he was like taken back because I'm sure he forgot all about that until I brought it up. But he was just a sweetheart. He was willing to do a lot, man, for the music, and he did a lot for the music. And so that's sort of, I think, what Alcide is onto now, and actually a lot of young musicians, I say young, but, we're all in our 40s, 30s, 40s. We're kind of all doing that now. There's not a lot of money to be made in this music. I think we do it because we still love playing the music, and we want to see it continue, and so we do a lot, man, to keep this thing going.
Yeah, and it's beautiful, and it's much needed. The one thing I did want to say is my jazz show actually is on in the morning, and I always thought that was kind of strange because jazz is typically something that's on at night, but it works. I mean, you might as well have a cup of coffee and let your brain wake up to some improv, It works. Awesome. I mean, that's the thing. Your brain really does kind of start firing very heavily on the synapses when you hear jazz, so why not wake up with it? The other thing, yeah, exactly. It makes sense. So, the other thing, too, is you come to Berklee, you study with Benny Green, you even had time with Wynton Marsalis. There's all these memories of you learning your craft. Talk to me about those experiences and how fundamental they were before you became, like, a professional that was in the world doing this full time.
I didn't get to spend that much time with those folks. I think that all of the musicians that I had the experience, the pleasure of being taught by, recognized that I was taking it very seriously and that I really wanted to do something with music. And I feel like they made an extra attempt to get me to see and hear the things that I was missing. I don't think I ever was missing anything in terms of like how to play the drums, but in terms of how to function within a group, I was missing some of those things. And I think a lot of band leaders who get to work with younger musicians sometimes maybe can tell like when someone's not really super interested in really trying to make something of their music, and they may not tell them the truth all the time because they maybe think, oh, well, they need to go through some other things first. It's probably not worth telling them the truth about what they're missing right now. I don't feel like I ever had someone skip out on telling me the truth. It didn't feel necessarily great at the time because it wasn't always positive, but I'm glad that they cared enough to tell me what I was missing, whether it be music that I hadn't listened to yet or the dynamics that I was using, if I was too loud or too soft, usually too loud. Young drummers often are too loud. Playing too much, not playing enough, not really listening to the soloist and trying to help them propel whatever it is they're trying to get to. It's a team effort when you improvise, and if you have one person who's not really being part of the team, then there's a problem. And so I feel like, if anything, those people you mentioned help me understand that is what it is about. It's about the team effort.
On 9/11/2001, there's a lot of people that regular moments in their lives were magnified by what was going on domestically and with the terrorist attack. But For you, you already had quite a moment going on when you were finishing your degree in music education at San Francisco State University. Talk to me about how big that was for you, what life changer, not only because of that day, but it had to be a big moment for you.
I had just applied to finish up my degree at San Francisco State that day. It was a big day for me in terms of going back to finish up what I had started in terms of getting my degree. I had taken some years off from school, really to just learn how to play in a band, in different bands. I played in a lot of bands prior to that date, and it was a big move for me to convince myself that I needed to get a degree, because it was really at that point in my life, I needed to either move to New York and try to make it to the next level as a musician, or I need to get a degree, and try something else besides playing music only. And so I'm so glad I did that. I'm a music teacher now. I get to work with approximately 220 some odd band students in the area that I live in, about 100 students at each school that I teach at. And then I also do private lessons, but my main love really is still to this day learning and teaching how to work inside of a band. I have students who are beginners, don't know anything about reading music, they don't know anything about holding their instruments, they don't know how to do anything really in terms of music making, all the way up through high school students who are preparing to possibly major in music. And it's great. I love it. It really has taken the burden for me having to take every single gig that comes my way, which is what I was having to do as mostly a local musician. To pay the rent, you got to really pick and choose the gigs that pay the most, and a lot of times they're not necessarily the most fun gigs or the most creative gigs or the gigs that you really want to play. Those gigs hardly pay anything, and so it's hard to only sustain yourself on those gigs. So it's been a blessing to give back to the youth the way I feel like I was given, and at the same time, I still play music, and I record, obviously, but I get to pick and choose when that happens, and I get to pick and choose a little bit more these days since I'm kind of leading a band now, the music that we're actually playing, which makes it way more fun for me, and it makes me want to practice. It makes me want to invest myself creatively, as opposed to how am I going to make rent this month. It's great to be a full-time professional performing musician if you're Wynton Marsalis or some of these other players who get to be sort of in that creative mode all the time. It's another thing to have to play a wedding or play a casual gig where there's not a lot of creativity and it's mostly about making the rent money. There's nothing wrong with that for people who can do that, but for me it was just, that wasn't what I got. That's not why I got into music.
So why do you love jazz?
I love jazz because I love the sound, of various types of jazz, not just any one particular style. But I love the sound of jazz. I love improvisation. I love the team aspect of improvising together. I love the camaraderie of playing with musicians who really have dedicated their lives to learning how to play the music. Again, the sharing of records with each other or turning people on to certain recordings that you feel are must-haves.
Everyone has a version of you, your family, your friends, your students, those that come to see you live and buy your music, but you're running your life. Who do you think you are?
I'm just a guy who likes to play music and likes to be around music. I guess I think of myself more as a teacher than I have in the last 20 years, becoming more and more of a teacher. I feel like teaching in its own right is an art form. So I'm trying to improve there. I'm still learning things about music myself, more about composition and how to play instruments so that I can teach beginners from scratch, and trying to improvise more on wind instruments, which is not the newest thing for me. Improvising on percussion instruments, piano, that's more what I've been into in the past, but I'm trying to get more into improvisation on the wind instruments so I can be more hands-on and model for my students more. So I guess that's who I feel like I am now, more of a music teacher, but I can't help but play with great musicians when I get the chance to, or even if I have to make those opportunities myself, call clubs and get gigs for people I want to play with. I can't really not play the drums too, even though I'm more of a teacher these days. I still love playing the drums. I want to do more of it. It's now at this point just sort of a balancing act, because when school is hitting, there's a lot going on. But then we have these 2 or 3 months in the summer where there's nothing really happening. So I'm trying to build up to that time, maybe in a couple of years where we can maybe get out on the road a little bit during the summer. So that's really where I'm hoping this is heading.
Very cool. Well, Jemal, thank you for opening up with me. Thank you for talking about African Skies, your life and music. It's a great one, man. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Joe, for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in California, Kansas City, and spots all over this earth, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jemal for being a very cool cat, all the music and the stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.